Hello everyone and welcome to a brief history lesson on Animate and Flash. So I want to go over sort of how we got to the point that we have a program called Animate where we do animation, and yet everything underlying it is a Flash player and there's action scripting and we have Flash files, right? Like the files come out of here that are .fla. What is going on with this drawing tool, right? I want to talk about kind of how we got there, so that you can better understand some of the underlying mechanics that are happening with what's going on. So this program did not start off as an Adobe program. It started off as a Macromedia program. This is just another company back in the day when not everything was owned by Adobe. Instead of InDesign, you had something like Quark and I think Photoshop maybe even started off not with Adobe. So this would have been back in the late 1990s and even in the early 2000s. So Macromedia comes out with this program that does look a lot like what we have. Oh, and actually, that's still Macromedia. Toolbar on the left and timeline on the top, and panel sets and properties were down here instead. But that's why we have names like the stage is where you're working from, and it is where this particular drawing quirk comes in. So back in the 90s, the method for vector drawing was not set in stone, right? Illustrator was not the dominant creature yet. So somewhere in the 2000s, Adobe buys Flash, and they still call it Flash. It's called Adobe's Flash, right? So they change the branding, they change kind of what it looks like. There we go. But a lot of the things remain the same. And one of the things that they do is they leave this intact, this weirdness, because people are using it. There are reasons to use this, including that you can punch a hole into something pretty easily, which you can't do in Illustrator without using like weird tools. But a lot of people were then entering this and saying, this is crazy. This is why can any of this happen? Which is why if I double click this, and I click the create object button, it turns into something that looks a lot more like Illustrator. For anyone who's familiar with Illustrator, hello, there we go. You know how anchor points work, right? So you can draw with this the same way you would draw in your standard vector program. Um, but again, as we were learning in class, double clicking still gets you inside the object, right? So you can get to the squishy Flash center. So that's one of the major changes that happened is Adobe buys the program and they keep the old drawing tools because professionals are using them and you can't make those kinds of changes. You can't just get rid of something. But they kind of put this container on top. But the other thing that's going on is that this program was designed to make websites. We have been using it for animation since day one because that's what people do is they co-opt things and use them for what they want, but it was originally designed for Flash-based websites, which at this point, if you want to see them, you have to go looking for like archives of them. And then quite often when you get to something in an archive, you actually have to like watch a video of someone interacting with it. And it's going to be lower res, because this was back when monitors were, 800 by 600 pixels. But you're going to see the mouse, see how it hovers over things and things interact. Look at those buttons. You click on them, stuff happens. So this is something from a Nike site. Video would play in the background. It was, there we go. So apparently they're using their keyboard to interact with this. And that's what this was designed to do, to make these interactive websites. This is long before the days of HTML5, long time before HTML5 was even a glimmer in someone's eye. People were saying, oh, we could have animation in websites instead of, the old GeoCities, which I don't even know if I could find anything. There you go. Look at this. anyone who's old enough remembers what some of these old sites would have looked like. HTML is table-based. It's always, there's a reason everything looks like it's always in these columns, because it is. And breaking free of that table in regular HTML is very, very difficult. And so you can see all of these, this is amazing. You can see all of these sites with all of their very, very strict adherence to this angular structure. And you can see why Flash would have been a nice, we're going to turn that off, would have been an appealing alternative for people. So, and you can also see sound is heavily involved in this program. There we go. So you can have, flickering and things coming in and out of screen. There's lots of interactivity that happens in these programs. But the way it worked is that, all these browsers, I have Chrome open right now, you might have Firefox or Safari, they run on HTML. And so in order to get them to do something else, you needed a plugin that is currently at this moment usually blocked, and that iOS and Safari are in the process of dropping entirely, not even to have anymore. It has not been updated, so it's not technically secure anymore. And so, but what used to happen is if I tell Flash to work, let's see. There we go. Allow. Makes you go through a lot of things. I hope this isn't too loud when I click on this. But here's an actual live website. First of all, you'll notice how tiny it is. This is, again, the age of those giant monitors that weighed 100 pounds and had 800 pixels by 600 pixels. And so by the time you get to the actual Flash part where you don't have the browser anymore and you don't have a scroll bar anymore, you are going to have maybe, let's see if they still have that default. It's something like 550 by 400. Web. So they don't even have the old default anymore, but if you have an old version of Flash, you're going to find, or of Animate, you're going to find a default that is hilariously small, something like 640 by 480, but a weirder size. And that, when you go looking for a lot of archival Flash sites, they're going to be that weird size. But the way this works is that if I hover over something, it does a thing. If I click on something, it does a thing. There's interactive sound. There's already, I accidentally triggered something earlier. So each one of these, you can see the button highlights and it triggers a different thing. If I click on something, let's go to a different one. This was a joke site, a cartoon site. There it is.
Game! Characters download! Email!
Right? So you click on these things and you get all this haptic feedback. You get all this visuals. There we go, tunes. Click on these things. Oh, there we go. So if I click on tunes, anytime I hover over one, we get a preview over there. So a lot of animators really use these sites, or a lot of artists would use these sites. I remember a lot of indie artists, like musicians and people, were using these types of sites to promote themselves because it wasn't that stale, this was the competition. Right? So if you're for like a small indie band with a lot of atmosphere, I don't know that this is really going to be your thing. And so you would come up with something like this, although maybe less silly. You can also, if you're watching the aesthetic that's going on here, they made these in the animation program. So while Animate, or Flash as it was back then, was supposed to be for the web, it was you hover over a button and something happens. You click on a button, something happens. Sound plays, there's feedback. That was what it was supposed to be for. Immediately, people said, "Oh, I'm going to make cartoons," and then they did. They even have ones on Flash being dead, which is hilarious. As soon as they could, they made cartoons. with something that was not designed to make cartoons. So understand that when you see all these animations, this was people wrangling a software that didn't want to do this. The timeline was not that friendly. Um, you're going to see some of the tools that we're using are going to feel a little bit clunky at first. And we're going to kind of go through the history of this, but it didn't want to do what we were asking it to do. We did it anyways because it's what we had. There was no Toon Boom, there was no other programs. So somewhere along the way, I believe there was something here. There we go. You have Adobe finally realizing that they had to make a change. One reason was because everyone was using this program for animation anyways. Here's your wonderful timeline of all the various versions of this. And I believe they changed the name to Animate in 2016. But the other reason is because in 2015, YouTube decided to drop Flash. Before that, iOS dropped Flash for YouTube. So what happened is Steve Jobs and Apple said, we don't want Flash. We don't ever want Flash again. And so there was like a year or two where iPhones could not play anything that was a Flash site and could not play any YouTube. So then YouTube had to change because so many people had an iPhone. So if Steve Jobs and Apple say you can't have Flash, well, then YouTube later on says we can't have Flash. And so with YouTube, so went the rest of the universe. And so this whole like, hey, this isn't, working because I have to click a plugin. It's not, that's been going on for 6 years at least. And you can search for all sorts of news articles, and it's been going on for so long. It's hilarious actually. But if you want to look into it, you can find just how many different ways this has been slowly, like barely staying alive, and now it's come to the fact that I believe Safari will drop it all together. So Chrome still allows me to turn it on if I want to, so I could play like whatever silly little Flash game that still hasn't been updated. Um, I'm not even sure what this one's going to look like. Oh, it's not going to work. That's great. Close. So, in another year or two, I won't be able to run this at all, which is a little bit of a shame because it does mean that a lot of stuff has been lost. So this is a collection of Flash sites, but it's not the actual site. It's a video of someone interacting with the site. The sites, no one can play them anymore. I haven't been able to find, I'm sure they're out there, but like an archive that actually has the actual site, because all of you could use them if you have, because you have Adobe Animate at home, it can play the Swift file, the SWF file that contains everything. But it's just such a shame that all this content is now lost because plugins and because browser wars and because phone wars and just like all these companies fighting with each other, and now it's not getting updated anymore. And so it's going to be lost to history eventually. Some places like this are actually working to bring all of their stuff onto YouTube or HTML5, which is going to be a challenge because this site was around for like years and had so much content. But others, a lot of these were advertisement sites. So, Nike doesn't need to hold on to its old Nike Air, site from 2006. They don't need that anymore. But all that convolution has led to this system where it's called Animate and we animate in it. And yet our published settings deal with all sorts of Flash terminology. Flash Player 30 is what we're working with. We're working in ActionScript 3.0. We don't do any action scripting in here, but we still have to worry that the file that we start with starts from ActionScript 3.0. I'm on the web, hang on, character animation, as opposed to HTML5. Because HTML5 would be something different. You could use that for web-based stuff if you wanted to. You absolutely could, and it limits you in ways that are helpful. But unfortunately, like it's just very confusing for me to say, make sure you're on Action Scripting 3.0, even though that's not a thing we're ever going to use, and it's not necessarily, and even this is starting to die out because they used it for games as well. So this program has also been used for games for a long time, um, and I believe some of that is starting to fade away. Um, but that is why it's a .fla file. If I went looking for that, it would be let's see if I save this test. There we go. You can see all the things. .fla. Oh, I don't have them. Oops, I don't want it called butterfly. It's called an animate document, but it's .fla because it was .flash file. It's also why when we hit Control Enter to test the movie and we make a Swift file, it creates a file that is literally no good anywhere. There we go. There it is. This Swift file can't be played by almost anything. There are a few free Flash players out there, but they're few and far between. You have to go looking, and you can't convert it to anything. So this is often its own corner of the technological universe. It's its own little, I can't cul-de-sac, basically. All right. So I just wanted to give you, in case you're wondering where these things came from, that is our brief history of Animate, how it turned from Macromedia Flash to Adobe Flash to Animate. It is why your very old teacher is going to call it Flash more than once because old habits die hard, and because the terminology is still sitting there looking at us in the face. But if you ever want to go looking for this stuff, you can. There's all sorts of uh, think pieces out there, history pieces that can give you more information about where this program has been and where it's going.